Hello again, listeners, and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast, as sponsored by thothwitchcraft.com, which is nothing to do with either of us, so don't accuse us. So Chris, you're here. So do you sacrifice chickens? Let's talk about offerings today. When's the last time you sacrificed a chicken?
I've never sacrificed a chicken. I quite like chickens. Unless you count dinner.
Have you ever sacrificed anything?
Well, it depends what you call sacrifice, I guess.
I suppose you're not allowed to give too much away on the podcast. You never know, the FBI or the police might be listening.
Exactly, and then they'll find the bodies. So I can talk generally. I've moved enough times to not be worried, I guess.
Every time he moves, there's always a patio that's just been completed before he moves. I'm always suspicious of that. I mean, in a house, how many patios do you actually need?
Plenty. The more space you got, the more bodies you can hide.
Tina's suspicious. She's always going on about the people she'd like to kill off, and I swear she's got about 4 patios now. She doesn't sit on any of them.
Nah.
It is a little bit worrying. It's either a patio or a shed she's got. It's always a patio or a shed, or the latest one was a greenhouse, actually, to be fair. It's only a small garden. But anyway, let's not go into too much detail about random people that the listeners don't know.
That we may not have killed.
Yeah. Let's instead talk about offerings to spirits. What are they and what is the point? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a non-corporeal being, something that's flitting about everywhere, why do you care that someone's leaving you a cigar or some rum or whatever? You know, what is up with that?
Well, we still work on a barter system. That's the thing. So
surely you've got to want something that they're going to give you.
Obviously.
Or is it just literally showing appreciation? Is that what it is?
I suppose it depends on what denomination you're from, I guess. For me, it would be... I suppose the main time I leave offerings would be when I've taken something. So if I have taken a harvest of wildflowers or something like that, or taken a branch from a tree, that sort of thing, then I feel at that point you should be thanking whoever it is you've taken it from.
So when you take a branch from a tree, are you one of those people that likes to tie plastic ribbons to the tree?
Like it? Why would you ask me such a stupid question?
Because you never know, there might be some idiots. I mean, what is it we call them now? Neo-pagans listening, which like to tie plastic ribbons to trees.
Yeah. Why you would take...
It did come up recently on Facebook. I saw someone write, actually as an author I know, wrote something about, I hate all of these idiots that come along and they trash the environment and put all these plastic ribbons on trees. And then someone underneath decided to comment, well, at least they're actually leaving something. Surely it's better to leave a plastic ribbon than nothing at all. Oh. And that person couldn't quite get, even though the guy whose name I'm not going to mention did try to explain, well, actually, no, it would be better not to leave anything, just your appreciation.
Yeah.
Than plastic ribbons on a tree. But, this could descend into one of those sessions where we talk about certain people and use the W word.
No, we're not going to do the W bashing today. No, I have issue with that based on the fact that, yes, it's plastic. Even if you're going to leave something like a fine silk, if you're going to leave something, it's either got to be sacrificial, in my opinion. So it can't just be some thread that you've bought, some plastic ribbon that you've bought from somewhere. That is not a sacrifice, in my opinion. If you were going to leave something there, it would have to be something made, but also
something you're going to miss.
Something potentially you're going to miss, but also something...
Like a chicken?
Not a chicken. I wouldn't leave a chicken in the woods, okay?
What if it's a free-range chicken? The expensive one.
I'm not leaving a chicken. So... Chicken sacrifice is more specifically for, a blood offering, isn't it? You're not actually sacrificing the chicken. It's not about the flesh. It's about the It's about the blood sacrifice and the cost of said blood sacrifice. So if you,
Well, yeah, partly, and I mean, I think if you look at, because there are people nowadays, which I do know of, who do sacrifice chickens and livestock and stuff that they rear themselves. But these are often very, very poor people, poor practitioners, from the financial perspective. And for them, giving up a portion of their food is a big deal
yeah,
still. It might not be for us because we have supermarkets, and in the current, we live in the UK, it's a first world country,
yeah,
so it's like we don't even have to deal with the same kind of things that these people would have to deal with because food is readily available for us. But I mean, both sacrifice and I think offerings, I maybe something that I think should be addressed and explained, because of course a lot of the time you'll open the books up and it will say you need to leave this offering in, it needs to be a specific offering, or they just give you some random crap and never really explain it. I mean, does it depend on what it is that you're working with?
yeah. I think if we're going to define, I suppose we should define the difference between an offering and a sacrifice. Then, if you want to be teaching mode, then I suppose we should, clear up the definition. So to me, an offering would be something that is about reverence. An offering is for not necessarily having something in return, but a thank you just because they are wanting to spend that time with somebody. So to me, an offering would be, um, a particular incense or a particular herb that is burnt in the presence of a particular spirit or deity, whereas a sacrifice is um, a barter. It's a trade of services. Would you agree?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I'm trying to think about my personal practice compared to other people's practices, because it's a kind of something like this is a doorway, a little window into someone else's practices. And seeing as we're the only two people here in corporeal form anyway that are on this podcast, it kind of makes sense that I suppose we should talk mostly about our stuff. So, like, if I was to work with the dead, for example, and it would be dead people essentially that I would know, I'd use my knowledge of what they liked in life and give that as a representation of them in death. I know that there's a big thing about when it comes to offerings and stuff like that with animism, in the belief that everything has its own spirit, whether it would be a plant or a tree, or whether it would be some sunglasses, and the fact that breaking the physical body releases that spirit. So when you look at some of the old kind of Norse offerings and things like that that you might have, you would break the thing to release its spirit. So, for example, when you look at some old kind of traditional witchcraft and that, you have the idea of breaking keys, or coins and things like that that can't be used, because although they can't be used in this world, the act of breaking it means that it's transferable to the spirit world to a certain extent.
Yeah,
But then when it comes to working with deities and spirits, very often I've seen deities and spirits work with people from the position that they're trying to teach them. So generally speaking, I think it's the work is the sacrifice. So like I've done cleansing rituals and stuff like that, which we don't need to go into too much detail because I can imagine you know a little bit too much about my solar cleansing rituals. Um, but like I've done things whereby I've done solar cleansing rituals at the top of a cliff, but you have to climb that cliff
yeah,
beforehand with no safety equipment. And there's a danger, and the fact that by the time I get to the top, I've torn one or two, my hands and stuff like that probably are bleeding. There's been a couple of close calls. There's the danger and the sacrifice of me going outside of going out of my way to do that, to get to the position where I'm, at the top of the cliff, where you're, so say, closer to the sun or closer to the spirit that you're working with. And it doesn't benefit the spirit necessarily, but it does show um, it shows that you actually care, and it shows how far away how far out of your way you're willing to go. Seriousness, I suppose.
I suppose I should have cleared up what I meant then, because what you've talked about is sacrifice in a general term, whereas actually what I meant was the difference between an offering and a sacrificial offering. Um, so obviously in that situation, the sacrificial offer, the sacrifice, the actual movement is payment for
Mm,
whatever's coming next. So
yeah.
even though it's sacrificial and you then don't need to sacrifice something else,
Mm,
it's still that's not reverence, is it? That is
no.
I'm about to do a working, I want your support in my cleanse, therefore the sacrifice I have made is en route in order to get to that point. That both is both reverence and a barter at the same time, whereas a
Yeah.
clean offering that is just about reverence um, would
Like a chicken.
no, a chicken would not be reverence. Stop going back to the chicken. The,
So if I cut a chicken's throat and say this is your payment,
that's a sacrificial
uh,
offering.
spirit of the Goetia, when I get Andrew Malice and cook him some mean lean grilling machine steak and put that on his altar, that's an offering, not a sacrifice, really, is it?
Yes, yes, unless you killed the cow, there is
Yeah,
that is not a sacrificial offering. That is, I don't know, because you could argue that that's the same as you climbing a cliff. The work has been done. The work was preparing the meal. So is that still
yeah.
sacrificial?
Uh, and
If you
and
bought the
buying it
steak
from
already
M&S.
made and already cooked by Chef a la mode down the corner and then offered that, that would just be an offering,
Tes-
not a sacrificial one.
Tesco, but what if it's Tesco's finest?
But you've still got to cook it. You're missing the point
Yes.
because you're focusing
No,
on the
I'm just being
chicken and you think it's
pedantic.
funny.
I don't actually sacrifice chickens, if I'm honest with you. But there we go. What's the last sacrifice you gave then
Last, the last sacrifice I probably gave
that you can think
would
of?
have probably been spring water, part of
Ah,
my February cleanse to prepare myself for my Saturn return. Remember? Um,
oh yeah. How's that going, by the way?
Mine was fine. Mine was fine. But you've
Uh,
got yours to look forward to next year. Is it still
I know
funny?
it's not going to be great, is it? No, it's not going to be. It's going to be epic in a bad way.
Um, Whereas I'm back on the track I should be on. So, I'm all good. Anyway,
I'm sweating like a pig just thinking about it.
good. Good. Serves you right. Anyway, back to chickens. No, I've never sacrificed a chicken. No, in my personal practice do I need to sacrifice a chicken. Like I said, I would probably do it in the way that you talk about with your solar cleanse. I would find some way that the actual gathering of the ingredient or that is required for the working is my sacrifice. So rather than buy such and such a herb from such and such a shop, I would go and gather something probably less. Lots of people would probably say, oh, well, that's not the right herb. Whereas for me, it would be, well, actually, I went out in that working and I selected the items that I thought that spirit or deity would have wanted from my travel. So that's a personal sacrifice in the search for them rather than going and buying that frankincense that was grown in a third world country, other side of the world, been shipped over. I personally, in my own practice, would find that a better way to work. So unless I've got on the plane myself, gone and harvested the frankincense, I would probably not be using the frankincense in my personal working. Doesn't mean we don't sell it. Go and check out the website. But my point.
Yeah. The frankincense oil is divine. Perfect for perfect for all of your offerings and
But
such.
for my personal practice, which is what we're talking about, not what other people do. What other people do, they might think that the financial cost of buying frankincense is enough of a sacrifice. That actually,
Mm,
some people would say that, without talking about turtle blood, because that's another topic for a different podcast. But um, the act of actually going to buy these exotic spices that are always included in these very complicated incenses from
yeah.
the sacrifice in that situation is they've had to get hold of these rare items, therefore they've worked harder in order to thank the goddess for whatever she or he has done. um, but that is a completely different kind of work into what I'm talking about, I guess.
Well, I think when it comes to working with spirits and deities, it's very easy if you have a relationship with that spirit and deity. I think the confusion often comes where you're trying to approach something you know nothing or little about.
Yeah,
And when you know little about it, it's essentially the same as knowing nothing. So if you
exactly.
were to approach a deity, you can kind of see from the kind of the capitalist business kind of world that we live in and that kind of culture we have in the West. Oh, this thing I'm going to ask to do me some, do me some kind of a favor in exchange for something. So that seems to be where the confusion comes, is the process of, well, how do you find out what it wants? What is it going to ask me? The contractual obligations, the approaching of the spirit, what spirit to approach in the first place, all that sort of thing. Because that seems to me to be what the books try to address but don't do a very good job of, because they miss the basic point. It's like, oh, this spirit, you just need to give it an offering of that and it'll do whatever you want regarding finance, for
Yeah,
example. Or, oh, this goddess, she really, really likes this plant. If you put this plant on a plate in front of a candle, she'll do whatever you want.
yeah.
So, what are your thoughts for simple procedures and stuff like that? Because I think it just depends too much on what you're talking about dealing with.
Yeah, I think
And maybe that's where they go wrong.
to me, unless you're dealing with something, I suppose part of it's your approach, isn't it? And with those sorts of situations, you're talking about potentially, if you're working with a Goetia or whatever, they've probably got specific needs and wants, and because that is a earthly want, it's quite useful to have that well tested shopping list of
Mm.
things that suit, mainly because you're dealing with something darker and therefore you don't really want to piss them off. Um, but I'm sure there are, obviously, I haven't worked with the Goetia very much, so to me, I'm sure there are quick fixes to what will please all of them. If you're working
Mm.
with lower level, and then it gets more specific as you go up. But I would assume that that's the way in which you would work. You would start lower and work your way up. Or is that just a point that's probably missed on somebody? Or would they just flick through an old copy of, the manual of ceremonial magic, known as the Lesser Key, and just go shopping list? Oh, I want such and such. Oh, it doesn't matter that he's a High Duke of such and such. That actually, it just says the book says I need this. Whereas to me, if you were going to work
But
with a
that
system
they,
like that, you start lower and work your way up. But
I think it's worse than that because, of course, if you're talking about grimoires in the grimoire tradition, that's all very Judeo-Christian. So that's a case of threatening until you get what you want.
yeah, I guess.
As opposed to the traditional ways of, I mean, it depends on what you're used to working with again. I mean, angels and stuff like that, if I was working with that, I wouldn't give it an offering or anything. I'd tell it what I want it
Yeah,
done, and I'd tell it this is what's going to be done, and they go off and do that. If it's something that is
But that's,
more human or of a lower vibration, then that tends to be a little bit more bartering.
yeah,
If it's something more deity, I tend to find that really it's just a case of picking the deity or thing that matches closest with what you're trying to accomplish. So if there's something that likes to involve itself in family affairs and protecting vulnerable people, and you've got a vulnerable person that you want protecting, approaching that deity and asking it for help, it's going to be eager to help you because that's in its remit. It likes to do
yeah,
nothing more than that. So there's not really a need to give sacrifice offering, that sort of thing. It's just generally a case of it's polite, I think.
yeah,
And maybe the way we may approach, and I can only really speak for myself, is the fact that I want to be known as the friend that doesn't just take,
yeah,
and that actually shows their appreciation. Because it's no different than some witches and stuff like that that we work with, whereby, something might crop up and we might send them a little care package through the post.
yeah,
And, it might not be instantly, but eventually you might get something back from them. But you're not given to receive, you're given because you think that they'll appreciate that and that you care and that you have some kind of a friendship/relationship with that person. And working with deities and spirits, I think, is the same.
I think that's where our work is different, though, isn't it? As we've often
Yeah.
said, kind of as professional witches, we're not tied to one spirit or another, and therefore we don't want to offend anybody because we'd like to still have the open channel for next time, if that next time ever comes. And I think because of that, we approach these deities as we get to know them in a very different way to So it's normally a case of it's slightly more organic way of working
Yeah,
with them,
yeah,
and therefore it might just be that we've gone for a walk and we've stumbled across such and such. Apollo seemed to be just popping around in that particular place you were in, and therefore you're kind of like, oh, okay, clearly that's an opening to speak to that deity, and therefore you then decide whether or not you want to foster a relationship and what that looks like. So to me, I would have gone probably a first couple of meetings before I've actually considered exactly what that offering would be appropriate. But that's mainly because the working that's required to that in itself is already its own sacrifice before you're actually giving any kind of offering. Whereas what we tend to deal with on the other side when we've got clients that are saying, oh, I've offended such and such, or I'm worried that I'm going to offend, you're in that situation where they've kind of read the book, decided they want to work with that deity, have not checked that
yeah,
deity is happy with that arrangement prior to
yeah.
then deciding to actually. And I think that's part of the problem, is with a lot of those, not to go back to the W bashing, but essentially it's I like the sound of that one, rather
Yeah,
than
yeah,
rather than it being, which is where, like you say, is how the Goetia would work, that kind of Christianized, Judeo-Christian way of dealing with things, which is, that's the one I want, therefore I'm going to do this to get its attention, um,
mm,
rather than it's being an organic, I want to send the right vibes out to get an audience with someone. They feel like they've got to have decided who it is, and I think part of that is a mishmash of not knowing whether or not they want to work with a deity or devote themselves to one. And I think that comes with the confusion that comes along with neo-paganism of.
so
No,
sorry.
go on.
So do you think it's a lot like online dating then? In that is the is the comparison between going on a website and having a load of descriptions, some of which might be fake
Yeah,
because it's a crappy book, versus going down the pub or bumping into someone organically on a night out and really hitting it off.
yeah. However much I hate that analogy, it's quite apt. But yeah, essentially, um, and I'm not saying I'm against speed dating, where you have another set of witches that have all worked with different deities, and you go, do you mind introducing me? Do you mind introducing me? And you
Yeah,
try out these different deities. I think I think the problem often occurs because they've decided that that particular deity is the one for them, and have not tested that out.
without having ever spoken to it or met with
And then
it,
they wonder
or
why they're in an abusive relationship, 6 months down the line. And they're trying to break up, but they can't break up because they've signed some kind of contract they didn't know was there.
well, we've seen that enough times.
So, you know what I mean? So I kind of think that the dating, however much that was horrid, is a really good analogy for it. Because it is, I think, working with deities and other spirits, this still applies to ancestral magic. There may be a natural want to help from your family, providing your family's like that. I don't think mine would be. You've got more chance of hitting it off because you've got blood connections involved. But I don't think that necessarily it's any different. It's just a case of how well does that work? Do you know them well enough to get the answers that you want, or the energy that you need to do whatever working it is? But yeah, I don't think I'd take a chicken to my first date, but
No, don't take a chicken. But yeah, again, I suppose, to be honest with you, that may even be too nice a way of putting it for modern practitioners and some modern pagans, because the difference with the Goetia kind, and I don't want to say the Goetia because you can use the Goetia in different ways, but that approach is, I don't think, is even like a dating website, because a dating website you expect to form a relationship.
those
That's
are
more like an
escort.
escorting service. Yeah, you're literally like a case of, that one will do.
Yeah.
That's how much it charges? Oh, okay, fine. I'm never going to talk to it again.
Yeah, I like the muscles on that. How much that's going to cost?
Yeah.
you know,
And then you get a nasty surprise.
yeah, when they're not good in the sack, or
I was thinking something else, but there we go. There's nothing a shot of penicillin can't fix.
Oh, okay.
And you know what?
You went to
Who do
magical
you go for?
syphilis, as if.
Who do you go for the magical dose of penicillin? Generally us, isn't
Well,
it?
yeah.
That's kind of our job. Oh, I contacted this thing and I did this and that and the other, and I thought, wow, just shove it a little bit of this and payment fine now. No, sorry, you didn't really understand quite what you were doing there. I just thought I'd throw that in because I know it may be a little bit vulgar for some, but I mean, it does kind of illustrate the point.
And what's
Some people
extra
say,
horrendous about the fact that you've used that analogy is you should always wear protection. It's a really
what,
good
you mean
one.
the old sage stick?
No,
Magical protection.
no, I was talking about real magical protection, but carry on.
Okay. So not this kind of pulling out
And
just before
expecting
the
that
end.
to be
Is that the equivalent of using a sage stick, just pulling out and hoping for the best?
pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much.
I wonder if this will get demonetized now.
Maybe.
I don't know. We haven't sworn.
No.
Well, when we did this, we did kind of want it to be a little bit about what witches would kind of talk about when they're on their own at the pub. But yeah, I mean, that is kind of magical conversations we have. We talk about magical syphilis and idiots not protecting themselves.
Yeah. And bad dates.
So we are bad dates, of course, bad dates. So have you ever had an offering or a sacrifice or anything like that go the wrong way, whereby you did misread the situation that you can think of? Because I can't really think.
No, I can't really, but then I think that our approach is probably different to most. The only way I've probably ever come close to messing up would be dealing with the Fae, which I have mostly stayed out of, just because I think that is a better one. But I think that's an interesting one to bring up, that we've had questions about that in the past, where they're kind of, I think we had one on No Holds Barred as well, when we had a chat about I think I may have offended, or how do I approach this? And we were talking about things going missing. Do you remember?
Yes, and can you believe it? We're out of time.